Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going on a site visit to the Baroque crown jewel of the Knights of St. John Hospitaller, their cathedral in Valletta, Malta. The cathedral was built over a 5-year span starting in 1572 as the convent church of St. John. A man named Girolamo Caesar, a Maltese architect, designed the building. In the 17th century, the interior was redesigned mostly by a Calabrian artist and a knight named Mattia Preti, who painted the vaulted ceiling you see here and far more. Let me walk you through a bit of the history that led to the completion of this gorgeous cathedral, today on the Armchair Traveler. My name is Judy, and I love travel, history, and finding out what makes people tick. If you're enjoying my content, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your help means more people will see my content. If you want more information, I have a WordPress blog, a page on Facebook, and a Twitter handle. The addresses are here or in the information block at the bottom of the screen. Thank you and enjoy your visit. Welcome to St. John's Co-Cathedral. The exterior view seen here reminds us you can't tell a book from the cover. The area around the cathedral is quite built up, so it's difficult to get a great image of it. I was standing in the middle of a cafe when I took this photo, but I was able to catch the 2 bell towers and the clocks, one each for the time, the day of the week, and the date. The facade is rather plain but well proportioned and is rounded out with 2 bell towers. The building gives a general impression of something that is very solid. The exterior and the original interior design was actually done by a Maltese architect named Girolamo Caesar. Girolamo was a member of the order and a military architect. I think the plain style, called Mannerist, must have appealed to him. Overall, the exterior is quite plain and reminds me a little bit of the walls of a fortress, perhaps reflecting his past as a military engineer, as well as the order's mood during the years following the Great Siege of Malta in 1565. They had managed to fight Suleiman and his finest to a standstill, but still had reason to believe that the Ottomans were not done with them. In part as a celebration, they built this cathedral. Once inside St. John's Co-Cathedral, you can't stop your eyes from looking upward at the huge barrel-vaulted ceiling over the nave. The Baroque interior you see today is chiefly thanks to a Calabrian artist named Mattia Preti, who was himself a member of the order. He redecorated the original modest interior in the 1660s when Grand Master Raphael Cotonnet asked for an interior to rival the churches of Rome. I'd say that the Grand Master got his wish. Preti designed the intricately carved stone walls and painted the vaulted ceiling and side altars with scenes of the life of St. John. Interestingly, at least to me, the figures painted into the ceiling next to each column appear to the viewer like three-dimensional statues. When you look closer, you can see it's a flat painted wall. Mattia Preti was an Italian Baroque artist born in Calabria. He had studied with one of Caravaggio's student followers, which probably accounts for his lifelong interest in Caravaggio's style. He was appointed a member of the order in 1660. In addition to the enormous Life of St. John the Baptist cycle on the cathedral ceiling, which he painted, he also created several altar paintings in the cathedral, including this one showing us St. George on horseback. Being a churchman or a knight didn't necessarily mean a man might not have enormous temporal accomplishments or an ego to match. This enormous piece of art is called a sepulchral monument. This photo captures just a small part of the entire piece, and it's dedicated to Grand Master Nicholas Cotonnet. It was produced by a sculptor named Domenico Guidi. Being a Grand Master was a kind of a family trait for this group. Nicholas was the brother of the previous Grand Master, named Raphael. During his time in office, Nicholas greatly improved the fortifications of the island. He was also responsible for ordering the redecoration of the cathedral as we see it today. Of course, not all knights raided a tomb like this one. On the floor is another impressive feature of the church. There are hundreds of these marble tombstones, the final resting place of many important knights of the order. Each one of these marks the tomb of an influential knight of the time. The more important the knight, the closer he was placed to the front of the church and the altar. I didn't see any names attached to these tombstones, but the text on the one on the left informs us that, if we give to the poor, we will have treasure in heaven. I mentioned to you that the order was quite wealthy, and this church is packed with art, the best of the time. What you see here is the beheading of St. John, he was the knight's namesake, by Caravaggio. Caravaggio was an enormously talented but infamous troublemaker during the Renaissance. This bad-tempered Italian painter was born in 1571, named Michelangelo Merisi, in a town outside of Milan called Caravaggio. He was a genius. His paintings combined realistic observation of the human state, both physical and emotional, a study which he performs using chiaroscuro, a style of dramatic use of lighting that has come to be known as tenebrism. Caravaggio trained in Milan before moving to Rome. He developed a reputation as an artist, but also as a very violent and unpredictable person. In fact, a street fight in Rome led to a death sentence for murder and forced him to escape the country. He arrived in Malta in 1607, where he actually became a Knight of the Order, although I think that was mostly a convenience. He stayed here painting on commission for only 2 years, after which he had to flee once more, this time to Sicily. He died in 1610 under uncertain circumstances. This is the only work of art that he ever signed. This is Caravaggio's painting of Saint Jerome, writing. Jerome is probably best known for his work translating the Bible into Latin. Before his time, the Old Testament was written primarily in Hebrew, with a couple of chapters in Aramaic, and the New Testament was written entirely in Greek, which meant that hardly anyone in the Roman world could read and understand it. Jerome translated it into Latin in the 4th century. He converted to Christianity after immoral youth, and the skull may be there to remind us of his remorse and his repentance for his previous sins. The Knights of St. John organized themselves into groups based primarily on the individual languages called langs. Each lang had a chapter house here in the island, and all but the Lang of England, which had disappeared by the time the cathedral was created, had a separate chapel here in the cathedral itself. These chapels each have an altar and all kinds of decorative details associated with their homes and their original culture. What you see here is the altarpiece of the Chapel of the Lang of Italy. It's dedicated to St. Catherine, with the altar showing the mystic marriage of St. Catherine by Mattia Preti, the man who designed the interior and provided so much else that we've seen today. The idea for the painting comes from visions received by Catherine of Alexandria or another St. Catherine, this time of Siena. In this case, it's apparently St. Catherine of Alexandria, who is shown as a princess with long blonde, loose hair, a crown, and carrying a martyr's palm, which you can just make out in the figure's left hand at the lower right-hand side of my photo. In the vision, Catherine undergoes a spiritual wedding ceremony with Christ, consecrating herself and her virginity to him. You can see the infant putting the wedding ring on her finger. The detail photo is actually from the guidebook for the Co-Cathedral. You'll recall I told you that Mattia Preti was responsible for much, but not all of the redecoration of the interior of the church. In 1666, a project creating a high altar was assigned to Malta's greatest sculptor, a man named Melchior Caffa. He even began the work. He intended to have a large sculpture group in bronze depicting the baptism of Christ. He never was able to complete the work. He actually died in a foundry accident the next year in Rome, and the work was incomplete and undocumented, so there wasn't even a guideline for what he thought it was going to look like. In 1703, a man named Giuseppe Mazzuoli, who was Caffa's only pupil, finished a marble version of the baptism of Christ. His version might have been influenced by his master's undocumented designs, but it's equally likely that much of the design was his own. St. John's Co-Cathedral is more than just a church. It was commissioned quite soon after the Great Siege as a new convent church, replacing a smaller one that had existed in Birgu. Birgu and the rest of the defensive area endured relentless bombardment from the Ottoman forces, and much of the area was left in ruins. Most of the damage, but not all, occurred after Fort St. Elmo and the rest of the Scriberis Peninsula, where modern Valletta sits, fell to the Ottomans after that fierce and fiercely defended siege. The knights made a conscious decision to build a new fortress, one that might easily be defended, and chose to build it here on Scriberis itself. Jean de la Cassière, the then Grand Master of the order, envisioned a new convent church. This church would replace a previous one at St. Lawrence's Church over on Burgoo. The construction of St. John's Co-Cathedral was not only about religious devotion and commemoration of those who had fallen during the siege, but also a strategic idea. Following the Great Siege, the knights recognized the need for a fortified city that could withstand potential Ottoman invasions. The Knights' Cathedral became an integral part of these defenses. The Grand Master needed a linchpin, some reason to draw the knights to this part of the island. The cathedral was that linchpin. You'll recall I told you that the church was designed by a military architect of the order and that it looked a little bit like a mini fortress. I think this is probably why. We've had a good look at the cathedral and learned how it was established and who it was intended to honor. Those would be the gallant knights of the order and the Grand Masters. However, 6,000 other ordinary soldiers, many of them Maltese, about, by some estimates, 1/3 of the total population of the island perished during the siege. Where is their memorial? The knights did give some credit to the men, and there were undoubtedly women as well, who helped them, but not nearly enough. The estimate of the number of foot soldiers is always uncertain, but most of the sources I've read say about 6,000. There's no estimate as to how many of them died or how many civilians really died along with them. Who were these men? The deeds of the individual knights and even some of the Turkish enemy have been well chronicled, but the heroism of the islands has been passed down mostly by word of mouth. I think, and this was the common belief during the age, they weren't considered important enough for the knights to even mention. They were men like Luca Brifa, a Maltese horseman about whom I can discover no more except that there is a park named after him, and Tony Bahada, a swimmer, horseman, and something of a Mediterranean Robin Hood, who had infiltrated the Turkish side and regularly swam the distance in and out of Burgoo and Songli, carrying messages from the Grand Master needed for the defense. These men remain in folklore, but not in the documents. They were real people. They and the 6,000 others participated equally in saving the island. The knights might have been the steel spine of this defense, but there would have been no resistance without them. What you see here is the Great Siege Memorial, also known as the Monument to the Fallen of the Great Siege, commemorating the siege. It consists of 3 bronze figures symbolizing faith, fortitude or valor, and civilization. It's quite impressive, but only dates from the late 1920s. The flowers you see in my photo are a pop-up memorial to a Maltese blogger who specialized in exposing crimes and corruption in the island's government. Her name was Daphne Caruana Galizia. You can learn more about Daphne in my Makers of History video blog. I'll put the link in the description box below. But now it's time to bid farewell to the Co-Cathedral and push on. Come back next time for another adventure with me here on The Armchair Traveler.